Good evening and welcome to the live telecast of Bridging Asia, the Singapore Debates on Channel News Asia. I'm your moderator, Gaurav Kirti. Thank you for joining us tonight. This series is a chance for prominent thinkers and opinion leaders to debate the issues that are going to shape Asia in the 21st century. Tonight, we're discussing migration, and I'm expecting some lively crossfire in this debate. On one hand, migrant workers boost the receiving country's economy by adding labor, new skills, and innovation. But there are also issues of overcrowding, competition for jobs, and integration. Sending countries benefit from the remittances, but they have to worry about the exploitative conditions that some migrant workers suffer under. Then there's the issue of the brain drain. So the question is, does Asian migration bring more benefits than drawbacks? Earlier, we polled the studio audience and visitors to our website. Let's see how the votes are split before the debate even starts. Well, it looks like most people think that it's got more benefits, 76%. Looks like the negative side is the underdog in this debate. But the results will be decided by this interactive vote, and you can participate in the poll throughout the program by visiting our website and changing this decision. Now let's meet our distinguished panel of adjudicators. First up, Mr. Chelva Raja, a senior counsel and Singapore's non-resident High Commissioner to Papua New Guinea. Ms. Eleanor Wong, playwright and associate professor at the Law Faculty in the National University of Singapore. And Mr. Adrian Tan, Director of Dispute Resolution at Singapore law firm Drew Napier. Thank you for joining us. Now let's meet our speakers. The first speaker arguing for the affirmative that migrants bring more benefits is Mr. Michael D. Mr. D is an investment banker and business leader with charitable interests. He spent the last 30 years on the move from the United States to London to Hong Kong and now Singapore. Supporting him is Mr. Andrew Bruce. Mr. Bruce is the Asia-Pacific Regional Director of the International Organization for Migration. He represents an intergovernmental organization that's been promoting humane and orderly migration since 1951. Welcome to both of you. Arguing the negative, that migration brings more drawbacks, is Mr. Rex Verona. Mr. Verona was the executive director at the Asian Migration Center, which he helped to develop into a pioneering knowledge and learning center in Asia. His teammate is Mr. Christopher Ng. Mr. Ng is the regional secretary of the UNI Global Union in Asia Pacific. He's been involved in promoting and lobbying for workers' rights since the 1970s. Welcome. The first speakers will have 3 minutes each to establish their case, followed by 1 minute of rebuttal time. Now let's get this debate started. Mr. D, you're a migrant yourself, and in fact your home country, United States, is having a very exciting debate about immigration issues. What makes you think that immigration is part of the solution, not part of the problem? Your 3 minutes begins now.
Thank you. We debate tonight whether migration brings benefits to Asia. To this, the two non-Asians on the panel answer a resounding yes. We contend that orderly and humane migration benefits all of Asia and should be accepted and promoted by regional policymakers and citizens alike. Migration is big. There are 1 billion migrants globally. 200 million of them are international migrants. If a separate nation of migrants was created, it would be the third largest in the world, and it would be equal to the next 4 countries combined. Migration is a way of life for 1 in 7 people on our planet. But let's consider migration from a scientific, legal, and economic perspective. Scientifically, migration is our nature. It's how we populated the planet. Today, migrants live in the space station. And kids, listen up. Migrants on the moon and Mars are on the drawing board. While people of the world look, speak, and dress differently, our DNA tells a simpler story. Genetic anthropology and the Human Genome Project is providing a vivid picture of our common ancestry and 65,000 years of recorded migration history. On the legal front, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was the first global expression of the rights of all human beings, and migration was prominent. Articles 13, 14, and 15 ratified the rights to change nationality, receive asylum, and to leave and return to one's country. This provides a universally accepted scientific and legal foundation for migration. Now let me turn to the benefits of skilled migration and that of economics. First, to the recipient nation. Migration brings economic opportunity, knowledge transfer, and investment in hard and soft infrastructure. Highly skilled workers accelerate the growth of job opportunities, enhance research and development, and improve human capital. Consider China's rapid growth from decades of foreign investment, or Singapore's 10,000 businesses. They show the opportunities presented by the migration of skilled workers, but it doesn't end there. This knowledge is then dispersed locally, creating a virtuous circle of national competitiveness. Other benefits include increased national reputation and the provision of services and goods locally. These skilled workers can live anywhere. Dynamic cultures in the arts, sports, education, and food develop with them. A self-perpetuating loop of progress is available to everybody willing to work for it. The ongoing national investment is also a benefit to all citizens. To the nation of origin, I'd note that its people benefit from the acquisition of knowledge which they then bring home. We see this with Chinese, Indian, and Singaporean students returning home after pursuing an education overseas. This isn't a brain drain, this is a brain expansion, as these individuals attain unique training and experiences. Also, origin nations benefit from an estimated global pool of $500 billion, which is surely a low estimate. As someone who spent 20 years as a migrant around the world, I can attest personally to all these benefits. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. D. Mr. Verona, in your 3 minutes, tell us why the rosy picture he's painting isn't so true on the ground.
Okay, good evening. My task here is to show that, on balance, Asian migration has more drawbacks than benefits. So I just need to cast doubt on what my friends are saying here. First off, we affirm that it has more drawbacks than benefits because of the approximately 30 million migrant laborers that are in Asia. A lot of them are suffering widespread abuses, labor rights abuses, physical abuses, sexual abuses, etc. So what my friend here is saying about orderly and humane migration, that is what can be. But what is a different picture. We don't debate what can be because we are in the same boat on that. But I think in the current scheme of migration now, the mere fact that there's a dualistic policy, protective for the skilled ones, but very repressive and marginalizing for the lower skilled ones, it creates extreme vulnerabilities. In Singapore, you see how the construction workers are, how the domestic workers are. We are not debating that there are benefits, there are. But on balance, if you counterpose the abuses that they suffer, then there are more abuses. In Asia alone, I can cite Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, etc. All of them have widespread abuses ranging from underpayment, non-payment, contract violations, illegal work, deportation, health issues, etc. Second off, while there are economic benefits, this tends to be micro. It benefits the individual. Even the IMF report of 2003 is saying it doesn't aggregate at the macro level. Therefore, the benefits that a family receives is good for the family, but it's not necessarily good for the country. I'm a Filipino, look at my country. After 40 years of migration, we receive $18 billion a year in terms of remittance. Are we better off now? We are one of the less developed countries in the whole of Southeast Asia. We pioneered migration labor export, but why are we at the last rung of the ladder if the logic is true? So another thing is, does it promote skilled work? Partly it does. The problem of work transfer is when migrants go to the country, it actually undermines local labor because then the protections that the local workers have are being threatened because then companies would say, we'll employ cheaper, unprotected migrants. So again, whereas the picture sounds good, if you look at from the expatriate point of view, it's not the same picture as in the unskilled work. And I refer here to factory workers, plantation workers, domestic workers, etc. The vast majority of the 30 million in Asia are in the lower skilled category. So for as long as governments keep that dualistic scheme, it will always be the case.
Thank you so much, Mr. Verona. Mr. D, he's raised an excellent point. What can be and what is are very different. What are your thoughts on that in 1 minute?
Well, first of all, I'm glad he agreed that there are substantial benefits. I would say, first of all, from a macro level, one only has to look at China, India, Singapore, and even the United States from the late 1800s to the early 1900s to see the gross macro levels that can accumulate. We're not really here to debate the management of migration, and I don't think we would disagree that the management and the execution of migration policy are very important. There are wide differences in those executions. The execution issue, though, does not negate the fact that there are substantial benefits that can be created. There are no doubt abuses, and they should be eliminated, and we would agree with that completely. In terms of local labor being hurt, we actually look at it not from the standpoint that there is a static pool of jobs and a static amount of revenue to be allocated, but rather that migration can increase, in many cases, the opportunity for local labor to move up from doing very low-skilled work to higher-skilled work. And that's the history of migration in the United States.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to move on. Mr. Verona, he raises also very good points. And in fact, in Philippines, the case, the trade deficit has been overwhelmed by the remittances that come in. So perhaps there is an argument to be made for the economic benefits for migration. What are your thoughts in 1 minute?
Yes, definitely. It helps buoy up the country. But as the IMF is saying, it's compensatory. It fills in the gaps in the budget, in the spending patterns, etc. It's not investment. It's not productively channeled. So at the end, well, we want to productively channel that. But again, that is what can be. What is not the case. That's the IMF and the World Bank reports 203, 209 respectively. So the point is, there's no arguing about the benefits, but moving up is not true for Asia. If you are a domestic worker in Singapore and Hong Kong, you are a domestic worker forever. They will not allow you to move up. That's why they categorically make unskilled worker as unskilled. If you are a laborer, you could not become a teacher. If you are a domestic worker, you could not become a doctor or whatever. So there is no job mobility. And that's the danger of it all. That's why the vulnerabilities and then the abuses are very widespread and long-term. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Verona. Well, we've got an exciting debate so far, but let's hear what our judges have to say. Shelva, what do you think of the debate so far? Who's swaying your opinion?
Well, I thought that we are here for a debate on whether Asian migration brings more benefits than drawbacks. But what I'm hearing from the proposition is a general case for migration, that migration is good. Without migration, the world wouldn't be where it is today. But I think the topic that we're facing today is much more narrower than that, is whether Asian migration has more benefits than drawbacks, which I understand to mean that is Asian migration bringing more benefits than drawbacks to Asia? Right? And perhaps I'd like to hear...
So contextualizing this debate to Asia in particular, is there something unique about this region that makes it more of a problem or more beneficial?
And in fact,
Eleanor,
that's my very question, because I think that I sympathize with the negative because I think they have a hard job today. Over time, and on balance, the benefits accruing to migration have got to be self-evident. But I think if they're going to win today, they need to somehow convince us that right now and in this region, we are somehow net losers when the migration occurs. And unfortunately, even there, they've got to deal with the fact that even in the last 5 to 10 years, I think it's fair to say that many Asian countries have moved from being sort of net losers in the game to essentially either being neutral, like Malaysia and Thailand, or even sort of net recipients, like Singapore, Hong Kong, etc. So there is some evidence that people move up that chain, so to speak, and you've got to convince us why that's not going to happen, I guess.
Adrian, your thoughts so far?
Both sides came out very clear. I think their positions are well established. I need to hear evidence. I need to hear why recipient nations benefit, why the workers there benefit from migration, why there's less competition for jobs or more. And as for the nation of origin, I understand that they benefit in terms of remittances, but if those remittances don't take place, if people just forget about their home countries, is there any other benefit that the nation of origin enjoys?
So this debate looks like it's still wide open. Both sides have got some good arguments. To our viewers, let us know what you think by logging on to channelnewsasia.com/bridgingasia. We'll hear from the second speakers when we return after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Bridging Asia, the Singapore Debates. We're discussing whether migration in Asia brings more benefits or drawbacks. So far, we've got a good clash. On the side of the affirmative, there's talking about economic benefits, but the negatives bringing up good points about the abuses and some of the realities on the ground. We move now to the second speakers. Arguing for the affirmative that Asian migration brings more benefits is Mr. Andrew Bruce. Mr. Bruce, if migration really does bring so much benefit, why are so many people so opposed to it? Your 3 minutes begins now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We believe unshakably that well-managed migration is and has always been a factor for good in human development. It is the oldest phenomenon known to humanity. From the moment man stood on his own 2 feet, he was on the move, striving to improve his condition. I will divide my comments into 3 parts this evening: the benefits to the country of destination, to the country of origin, and to the migrants themselves. First, the benefits to the countries of destination. The migrants that come to our countries are often the most highly motivated and the brightest people. In many cases, their relatives have clubbed together to send them, as they know that they can be counted upon to succeed. They may face arduous journeys, cramped living conditions, and aching separation from loved ones, to go to other countries in the region to do the jobs that keep the economies running, the jobs that local people do not want to do. Their migration is usually temporary. They just want to earn enough money to go home, marry, build a house, start a small business, and give their children opportunities. As for changing the face of communities, this can happen, and usually it's a positive change. Migrants bring new and dynamic experiences with them. They may be musicians, chefs, painters, designers, teachers, or social workers. Many of them are living among us today, adding their own spice to our cultures. Secondly, the benefits for the countries of origin. For Sri Lanka and the Philippines, the remittances from the masses of their people working as domestic helpers abroad alone is worth billions of dollars a year. And it is estimated that annually migrants send $500 billion home in remittances. Migrant remittances educate children, build places of worship, and pay for health care. And thirdly, the benefits for the migrants themselves. There are many motivators for migration. Some people have little choice but to flee oppressive regimes or war. This evening, however, we are discussing the vast majority of migrants in our region who choose to leave home to find work abroad. Migrants do move in their millions to countries where there is work, seeking a better life, not only for themselves but for their children and their relatives too. The question of the benefits of migration is redundant in many societies. Asia needs migrants, and migration is here to stay. The demographics in countries like Japan and Singapore and Thailand means there will not be enough workers without migrants. To conclude, let me reiterate that while migration brings benefits, well-managed migration can bring even greater benefits, prevent exploitation, and result in increased prosperity.
We're going to have to end you there.
Thank you.
Mr. Ng, he mentioned a key phrase, well-managed migration. But it's never well-managed on the ground, is it?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts in 3 minutes?
I think at the outset it has to be clear. We are not against migration per se, nor are we against migration to support development. But we certainly are against development on the basis of migration. I think this is the distinction that we have to make. My colleague has already pointed out the example of the dependency on migrant workers from Philippines traveling overseas to generate the necessary revenue to be sent home. What was initially a temporary plan in 1970, starting with 2,000 of our migrant workers. Today, we have reached a stage in Philippines where there are now nearly 10 million of these migrant workers, 10% of the Filipino population working overseas. If you multiply it by the family members and others, we are talking about 40 million Filipino people who are not living a complete life as they should be. This is the point we want to emphasize. Therefore, we are not against migration if it is out of free will and free choice, as you have indicated. It is for this reason we are advising against accepting that migration is a norm that we should encourage. I want to say that it is also not always beneficial to the country. I think sometime earlier this year there was a newspaper report in Singapore that, the cleaners in Singapore in the year 2010, 2000, they were earning around $1,300 per month. In 2010, the salary dropped from $1,300 to $800. And one of the reasons given was because there was no proper control over the flow of migrant workers. Because of the cheap labor available from India, China, all these contractors just allowed them to come in. So you will see a negative impact in that sense. Therefore, the assumption that it's good if it's well managed is absolutely correct. And this is what we are arguing. Unless it is properly managed. Therefore, we cannot work on the assumption that because if it is properly managed, it is good, therefore it is good. I think that is a very weak argument. And we can go on to say that there are also other negative impact. And this is, again, if we look around, the discussion in Singapore today, there is, again, a clear indication that it is not perfectly a good system that we want to endorse. And let me conclude by saying, at the end of the day, I agree that migration will gradually and inevitably become the norm. But until that day, until we're able to put into place a good regulatory system in place, I think I want to maintain the fact that migration in Asia is certainly not going to help the countries or the people, and we should, for the time being, be careful about propagating it as a solution to all the problems.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ng. Mr. Bruce, you mentioned that it's a necessity, but if it does become a necessity, what does to stop it from becoming a crutch for countries to rely on it for cheaper labor rather than developing productivity in their own people? What are your thoughts in 1 minute?
I think we can draw parallels between the Philippines and other countries. For example, Korea. Korea had a massive labor migration program, and now, because of other factors that happened in Korea, it has none, because actually the economy of that country was boosted. So I don't know if we can say that the Philippines hasn't done well because of all its labor migration. I think there are a lot of factors at play. I think we must go back to the management issue. Migration is here to stay, and we must aspire to improving the management of it. As it increases its size, we're convinced at IOM that there will have to be a better system of management put in place, maybe a global management system for the migration. Because at the moment, we all know that there are many problems with it, but it's going to become bigger and it's going to become unmanageable if more
Thank you so much, Mr. Bruce. So what sounds like we're hearing is that there are real problems, and unless a real regulatory framework comes in, these problems might get out of control. Mr. Ng, that seems to echo what you're saying as well. What are your thoughts?
I think there's no doubt about it. There is now an addiction to migration as a solution to all the problem. I will reiterate the point raised earlier on about the availability of workers from overseas to come over to Singapore or elsewhere to do the difficult, dirty or dangerous job. My contention is this: if migration is not an alternative, then inevitably the country will have to take on responsibilities to encourage, to prepare the citizen to assume the job. As long as there is an assumption that we could easily get workers from overseas to come and do this job, we will continuously avoid this. And in the larger picture, I sense that there is also a danger. If the availability of these workers, or these kind of workers easily, will also one day cause governments and even employers to be complacent about need for capital, human capital development. And this, I think, is the most dangerous threat that we will face of this complacency.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ng. Well, it looks like we've had a change of heart among some of our studio audience as well as the viewers at home. Let's take a look at the poll. Some shift. The side for the affirmative has gone down from 75 to 71.4%, and the negative has shifted it from 25 to 28.6. So we're starting to see some change in the results. Let's go now to the judges. Keep your votes coming, by the way. Keep influencing the debate as it goes along. And we'll move now to Eleanor Wong. What are your thoughts so far?
Well, I am going to ask a question of the affirmative. a key assumption sort of underlying, perhaps it's unspoken, but underlying your argument is that movement is not a zero-sum game in a world where the pie is growing. I guess my question is this sustainable? Does it become a zero-sum game? Are we seeing it that happening? And when that does happen, will we find a situation where those countries that are latecomers to the development game become entrenched as suppliers of lower skilled workers in what is effectively a newer form of slavery and imported slavery and indenturement?
Well, it's pushing the debate to a whole different level, but that is an interesting question. If we start relying on cheaper, better, faster, will these countries just be permanent sources of cheap labor? How do they break out of that cycle? Would either of you care to respond?
I'll just make a quick point.
Sure.
First of all, I think you need to compare the migrant position to what their position would be if they didn't migrate. People make the choice to migrate, right? Obviously, if there is trafficking, that's a different story. But most people make the choice. So the situation, even though difficult in many cases, and it should be fixed, in many cases is still better than if they hadn't done the migration. That's why people migrate within China from the rural countryside into the cities, into difficult situations, and work at a place like Foxconn. Many corporations around the world, Apple Computer, Nike, I mean, you can go down the list, are all improving conditions and working on this problem because the public and the marketplace wants those conditions resolved. They want to know when they buy an Apple computer that people aren't jumping off the roof of a Foxconn thing. They want to know that some 12-year-old girl has not made their $100 sneakers. These things are getting fixed. The marketplace has a very important role to play in that function.
Mr. Ng, I'm going to throw this question over to you as well. Now, he spoke about it being a choice for people to migrate for a better life for themselves, but do countries benefit? How does a country like Philippines break out of that cycle of providing labor after 10, 15 years?
I think we go back again with the Filipino experience. I think originally the idea was we need to send some of these workers overseas to work because they have no job. And the assumption is that then in the process we will try to rebuild the country and then all of them can come back and stay put. Korea did that because in the 70s, that is exactly what Korea did. But in the case of Philippines, and I can say Indonesia for that matter because we deal with a lot of these migrant workers, today the profit margin that is to be derived from sending people make it into an inevitable business. So you actually have a conspiracy where all these agents and others are creating the environment to cause the need for these people to work because there's a supply and demand situation. And that is exactly what we should be concerned about. I want to reiterate again, we have no problem about migration where people move because they want to have a better future. No doubt we have to welcome it. It has to be so. But it cannot be engineered and caused by creating the environment to force them. And this is the situation we are seeing in every country now.
Adrian, you look like you're writing something furiously. Do you have any thoughts on what you're hearing so far?
I have a question, I suppose, for both panels. There are two kinds of migration. There's the migration by choice, the migrants who build America, who are the musicians, the painters, the people who enrich your culture, and that's one thing. And then there are the migrants who are forced to remain as laborers. And that's what Asian migration seems to be all about. And you may be a musician and an artist and a painter in your own country, but when you come here, you're a domestic worker, you're a laborer, and you're going to remain that way. It's a brain drain that's not benefiting anyone. That's how I feel, but maybe I'm wrong.
Mr. D, perhaps you'd like to take a stab at this question first. What is it
Look,
about Asian migration?
from the United States, the Chinese that came over to build the railroads, their families now own large businesses and are very successful and have gone to university throughout the United States. Many of the migrants that went to countries like the U.S. as they were growing, as I think would be true with China, enormous opportunity. The typical migration route is unskilled worker, next generation skilled worker, next generation managerial worker. In a growing economy, that has taken place, and that's been the history of U.S. migration. Now, whether that can be replaced over here, we remain to see. But I look at the improvement of the lives of people in rural China. It's immense. I mean, it is very impressive. And now that's internal migration within China largely.
Rex, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're precisely right. As I was referring earlier, the European and American models of migration is not the same as Asia, because Asia, the 30 million are pretty much temporary laboring migrants with no residency rights. And that's where the crux of the matter is. And that is not an accident. It's because of the policies itself that the governments are imposing. They do confine consciously these laboring migrants into such a category so that they can exploit them as cheap labor. And that's why development will never happen. If you're a Cambodian partner, for example, was saying the prime years of our laboring class are spent in Thailand. When they are sick, disabled, HIV, etc., they go back to our country. We bear the cost of that. So how can we develop? In the Philippines, 2 dead migrants return every day. So if you say we are 8 million, yes, but what is a more deadly industry in Singapore? 2 dead people every day. So the cost of it is so immense that if we factor in all the social costs and the long-term things, the progress of other countries you were citing is not because of migration, even China. It's because migrants contributed, but it's not because of migration. So I think we want to see Sri Lanka, India, Burma, Philippines, Indonesia, etc. These are countries that are dependent on migrants, but they are the least developed in Asia. And therefore, that shows a picture that is not benefiting them.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Verna. We have a really exciting debate now, and we have some sort of a difference between the experience of high-skilled migrants and low-skilled migrants. And when you contextualize that into Asia, you're getting a very different picture altogether. So we're seeing some interesting things. And the poll has been shifting as well. So let's take a quick look at the poll. Well, it looks like we've got 61.2% now for the affirmative, down from 75 at the start, and 38.8%. So congratulations to the negative for shifting it, but you still have a long way to go. The affirmatives still have a strong head start. Well, that's all we have for the first part of this debate. We've heard from all 4 speakers. After this, we'll hear from the questions from the audience, as well as from the viewers at home, and from the judges. Stay tuned. It's time for a quick commercial break. Welcome back to Bridging Asia, the Singapore debates. You've heard compelling arguments from both sides on the experiences of high-skilled laborers, low-skilled laborers, and in particular, Asian countries. We have a lot of thoughts brewing, a lot of questions, so let's throw it over to the studio audience for some questions first. I believe you have a question over there in the rear.
Yes, Augustine. As the judges have pointed out, this is a debate. So I think, gentlemen, don't take this personally, but going to the United States, you haven't even started talking about what's happening on the US-Mexican border. So I think you should really be trying to rebut what the other side has raised, dirty, difficult, dangerous jobs. I mean, there are real case studies. I know of one Filipino lady, a graduate of Ateneo de Manila, working as in a call center for a financial institution. You used the word choice. What choice is that? She had to leave behind 2 boys to come and work in Singapore. So I think the reality is private sector is creating jobs and not giving them the proper working conditions, and you put yourself in a spot by saying managed well. I think that's where you were losing the point. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Augustine. Mr. D, any response to that? Your country is also debating immigration, just like we are.
Well, look, first I would just say, what is the cost of non-migration? What happens if those people don't go? What happens if 10 million people from the Philippines go back to the Philippines? Is their situation going to be better? It's not clear. I'm not convinced it is going to be better. The scenario, the straw man that the other side has set up, is that of almost a slavery situation where you're bringing people home in body bags. Granted, situations are tough, but the mother that you described who leaves her children and goes to work, she doesn't have to do that. No one's forcing her to do that. The people that help us out at home aren't forced to go and do that. The people in Mexico that go into the United States aren't forced to go. They go because it's better. Even if it's hard, it's still better than not going. That opportunity, migration is in effect a macro market force. People are attracted to opportunity, and they have to make a decision. Is it better or worse than my current situation? And hundreds of millions of people decide it's tough, but it's better.
So Mr. D seems to be saying that it's the lesser of 2 evils. True, it's not an ideal situation, but it's the lesser of 2 evils. Mr. Verna, you feel otherwise, and you've worked with organizations on the ground. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
20 years. Well, the point is, the fact that the people could not return is exactly the problem. it doesn't therefore answer the question that it is more beneficial. It actually illustrates that because of the wrong policies that the sending governments are pursuing, and this is very, as IMF Report 203 says, that's the danger of governments being dependent on remittances, because then they shy away from the hard steps to do local development, because then they rely on migration. Families substitute remittance to labor income. Therefore, they don't work anymore, productivity falls. And that's why the poverty of the country is linked actually to remittance, anti-developmental consequences. This is IMF saying, it's not me speaking this.
Thank you so much. We have a question now from the internet, and it's an interesting one. Are anti-immigration proponents leaning towards racial bias? So are those people who ask the migrants to stay home, are they racist? Mr. Ng, perhaps you have some thoughts.
I think definitely not. And on the contrary, I mean, those who are against migration do it out of sympathy for those who are being exploited. I think this is exactly the thing that we have to be concerned about. When we discuss migration, we must not be confused about, the racial factor that people want to propagate as a reason why those who are against migration are doing it. I think that's dangerous. This is why I think this discussion is very useful, because we clarify in a very straightforward manner that we are talking about it from a factual point of view about what are being experienced now in many of these countries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ng. We'll throw it open now to another question from the audience. I believe we have one over here on the left.
Yes. Good afternoon. I was thinking that in his initial remarks, Mr. Bruce seemed to mix the role of skilled migrants and unskilled migrants. I was wondering if should migration be linked to a quota between skilled and unskilled workers. That would benefit the developing countries in that they wouldn't see such a strong brain drain, and at the same time it would give opportunities to those who wouldn't have the chance to migrate to a different country. Thank you.
Mr. Bruce, this is something that you spoke about earlier as well, the regulatory framework, and not enough work has been done in this area, right? What are your thoughts?
Exactly. I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot more. It's a sovereignty issue. Governments want to select the people that enter their country, and often in certain situations, a laissez-faire kind of approach has been best. But a laissez-faire approach, unfortunately, in many situations encourages trafficking, exploitation, and that's why there is a need for governments to recognize that they need to manage this and put a lot more energy into it. It's expensive to manage migration. When exploitation of workers goes on in factories in a country, it's expensive to have inspectors visiting factories all over the country, and you'll find that the number of factory inspectors in many countries is very, very low, but there needs to be enormous effort by countries to really get this situation managed, and it's not being done, and it needs to be done.
It is expensive, but it's important, and at this point it's still insufficient. Now, both of you have been working with organizations trying to help promote better regulation for this. Mr. Ng, what are your thoughts on this?
I think at this moment the problem is that in the process, under the present process of globalizations, where multinationals are propagating competition between countries for FDI investment, we have actually encouraged the race to the bottom. And this competition has created all kind of a system and rules that perpetuate this kind of exploitation that we are talking about. This morning, actually, I was in Kuala Lumpur participating in a discussion on CSR. And it was very interesting, to hear, the business people, the various professionals talking about CSR as a marketing tool to improve upon. I sat there as a panel member totally shocked, and then someone stood up and said, I'm an auditor. My job is to make sure that this company produce good audit report. My remark was very clear. If we are living in the world where exploitation of human beings is subject to
a little bit out of time.
Is subject to this kind of rules, then I think there's something wrong with the world we're living in.
That's a very interesting point. And actually, the sign of a great debate is that the opposition has gained tremendous ground. Now, at the start of this debate, we started off with 24% saying that there were more drawbacks than benefits. That's doubled. Now 47.9% say there are more drawbacks than benefits to migration. So we're getting to a really heated debate. And we're coming to the close of the show soon, so keep your votes coming. And remember, your vote decides the winning team. Welcome back to Bridging Asia, the Singapore Debates. It's been an extremely exciting and, as promised, lively debate. The opposition team has now overtaken the proposition, started again with only 24%. They now have a majority of 52.4%. They might actually win this debate. It's time now for the speakers' final summations, and this is where they give you their last 1-minute pitch to convince you. Let's start with the affirmative side. Mr. D, your 1 minute.
Thank you. Our opposition to this point assumes that in the home market, where the labor is leaving from, that there's no exploitation, that there are no unsafe working conditions, that opportunity is plentiful and exists and jobs are everywhere, and that somehow those people that are living in happy land are forced to get on a boat and go into these terrible, horrible working conditions. In fact, that's not true. It's the situation in those countries are very difficult and very troubled. And consequently, they make the choice to move to those countries, which is improving their opportunity. And final thing I would say is, look at Singapore. Look at the growth of Singapore, where it was in 1965 and where it is today. 40% migrant workers in Singapore. Singapore is a migrant nation. Singapore is probably the single greatest story in the history of migration. And people should remember that.
Thank you so much. Singapore is a great example, but Mr. Verona, not every country can be Singapore. What are your thoughts in 1 minute?
Well, Hong Kong is too. But the difference is the fact that the countries that have evolved into that are the countries where the migrants became immigrants with full rights, equal treatment. And that's what spells the difference. That's the European and American model. But the model in Asia now that is being presented is the labor export-only model. And that is where Indonesia, Philippines, Sri Lanka, India, and now Vietnam are heading. And therefore, these are the countries that will perpetually be dependent on them. As the IMF warns, it is not a path to development, it's a path against development. And therefore, our argument is we are not against migration, we have been advocating for it. Migration is a right, job is a right, development is a basic right. These are all enshrined in UN conventions. What we are advocating for is that the dualistic policies be removed, equality of treatment based on rights, so that if people can freely move and support their families, then that's where real development and benefits will come from. That's our argument. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Verona. Mr. Bruce, you have 1 minute.
I think the opposition is using countries like the Philippines and others that haven't done so well, but they always forget Korea, they forget Thailand, and I would suggest they forget Vietnam too. Because I see the way Vietnam is developing that in another 10 or 15 years, Vietnam will not be exporting labor. So for certain countries, it has been difficult and it makes the development difficult. But in certain other countries, like Korea, like Thailand, and I venture like Vietnam, that development, that overseas employment, sending workers abroad, they will come home. They will be part of developing the country, and Vietnam will soon, like Korea, like Thailand, begin importing workers. So we cannot say, I don't believe that labor migration will perpetuate itself and bring a country down.
Thank you so much. So it sounds like it's possible, and really both sides have made strong cases. In fact, all four of you are proponents of migration. Mr. Ng, you have the final 1 minute of this debate to say your final piece.
I think we just have to reiterate the point again, because if we compare Philippines even with Vietnam, I agree with your observation. The fundamental is the policies of the government. In the case of Vietnam, for example, I must say that they are conscious, or Korea for that matter, they are conscious about the need for them to have long-term perspective of development, and therefore they are capable of making these changes. And that is the point we are saying. Until that day when we are sure of it, I don't think we should prescribe migration as the solution to development. And this is the contention that we maintain. And therefore, as a trade union movement, as an NGO, we will continue to provide protection to these workers and continue to propagate for regulations that will achieve this ideal that we have been saying all the while.
Thank you so much. So we've heard from all the four speakers. They've wrapped up.
You agree migration has benefits. It just needs to be executed well.
Well, that seems to be the point of this debate.
But on balance,
It's the principle and the practical. We've got a good clash. Let's throw it over to the judges now. Adrian, what are your thoughts?
It's a balancing exercise. I think this is how I do the pros and cons. Asian migration is good for the receiving country. It's bad for the country of origin. I think I understand the point about choice, but I also understand that it can become an addiction, it can become a crutch, it can become a substitute for real ideas and real economic development in the home country. It's good for skilled migrants who get full rights of residence, and it's bad for unskilled migrants who are discriminated against. On balance, this is a tough one. I'm voting with the affirmative.
All right, so you're leaning towards the affirmative. Eleanor, what are your thoughts?
Well, I came in here for once rather positive and
Unusual.
unusually so, I must say. Unfortunately, the negative managed to put a dampener on my mood. I had wanted to hear a bit more from the affirmative about the success stories in Asia, and perhaps some evidence pointed to the fact that we hadn't come to a bottleneck of some sort. Unfortunately, I think the negative was slightly more persuasive here in showing that we might have come indeed to some bottleneck where the opportunities are no longer going to sort of raise all the boats together, and there might well be some countries in Asia who will be stuck in an emigration rut. A net brain drain, perhaps indefinitely. And on that basis, I think I'm going to once again have to be true to form and vote negative, much as I didn't want to this time around.
Shelva, who's swung your vote this time?
Well, the question is, why do these people, I mean, the negative put their case very well, I thought, saying that there are all these terrible drawbacks, people are exploited and stuff like that, but still they leave. Still they vote with their feet and they go overseas to do these jobs which we say don't give them a right of abode in those countries, but they know it when they go there, and they still go there. So what are they doing? Are they hoping against hope that something will change, like people get drawn from the countryside into the bright lights of the city, imagining a life which is actually non-existent, and they're going to be exploited till the...
Well, you know how many songs there are about how that works out wrong, don't you?
But they hear from the people who return, from the foreign workers who return, and still they go. So there must be something that drives them, either this bright light, wonderful prospect, or, as the proposition have suggested,
there's still benefit in the entire process.
Yes, and that the working conditions abroad may be lousy, but at home is even worse. You see?
All right. Well, thank you so much, judges. I'm going to have to ask you to choose a side, though.
I choose the proposition.
So we've got two judges on the affirmative, one on the negative. And now it's time for you at home and our studio audience to pick a side and decide on the winner in this debate. Please cast your final votes now on your smartphones at our website. No, you can't vote for yourselves. And now, time for our final tally. Let's have it up on the scores. Well, it looks like the affirmative side have lost a 76% lead and have gone down to 45.5%. The side with the drawback started off with a meager 24%, but have clawed their way up to 55.2% now. So it looks like the negative side has won this debate. Congratulations to you guys. Now, they've done the seemingly impossible, but migration's always going to be a very delicate and tricky policy balance. And the trick is that policymakers need to use migration as part of the solution, not the entire solution. That's what I'm hearing from all four speakers, and that migration still has hope. So that's all the time we have for tonight on this particular debate. But join us next week when we discuss which Asian giant is going to be ahead in 2030. Will it be China or India? I'm Gaurav Kirti, and we'll see you next week on Bridging Asia, the Singapore Debates.